Well, my friends, I've got a very, very exciting conversation to have today with Laura and Joe from the company Thermore. Thanks so much for taking the time to hang out with me today and talk the technical, nerdy details on synthetic insulation. It's fun.
Hey, we like to be the nerds. We're happy to be the nerds.
Origin stories are fun. I want to talk about like how Thermore got started, but maybe even just take a step back a little bit. Like, what is the industry in a bigger picture that Thermore represents or is part of? That as a hiker, as a person that spends time in the outdoors, like why should I care about Thermore? Why is this important as somebody sitting down to listen to this conversation we're having? Like, why does it matter?
So I can take a little bit, and Joe, you're happy to chime in too. But I think as someone that is specifically focused on backcountry and doing outdoor sports, synthetic insulation is able to get wet and still achieve a high performance standard. So when you are looking to buy apparel and you're being conscientious of that purchase, it shouldn't just be, oh, I'm going out to pick a garment. It should be, what are all the components in that garment, and how am I as a consumer making an informed decision, not just for the activity that I am doing, but also is this an environmentally friendly choice, given that I need to be a good steward of the environment that I am actively participating in.
Yeah, I would definitely everything that Laura said is accurate for sure. I would just say that within the industry, I think that our reputation is for a performance brand that has a thread of sustainability running through it at all times. Um, and I think we sort of place ourselves as a performance value brand as well. So we're trying to give the consumer a high level of performance at a very attainable price point, so that they can really elevate their gear without breaking the bank type of thing. So
So, what are your like individual roles at Thermore to just understand like what you're responsible for, what the roles are there?
So I'm Thermore's new and first VP of Global Marketing and Communications.
Very
So
cool.
my role is developing as we speak, but the goal is to be able to educate consumers specifically about thinking about the components that go inside of their fashion decisions.
and Devin, I'm basically handling sales for North America, and I've been with Thermore 20 years, and just I really enjoyed my time with the company. I truly believe in the product. They have something that works really well, and been very easy for me to get behind that, um, because I they've proven to me over and over again that the product is absolutely a performer, and that's something that I always kind of do in my personal life. That I can't back anything unless I absolutely 101% believe in it. And so it's been an easy sell for me to work with Thermore because their product does work.
That's awesome. I love it. Which like I mean that leads into the next question I wanted to ask was just kind of around the idea. I mean, we're talking about synthetic insulation, but I feel like so often the conversation is like a versus or a competition where it's like it's either down or it's synthetic and there has to be this like battle between the two, and I think it's not even really necessary to have that conversation because the product is so different. Like I even just like scrolling through social media today, I saw a post from a company that was like, let's talk about down versus synthetic and the pros and the cons, and only like two pieces of information were presented for like, here's down, here's synthetic, and the synthetic immediately got the label of not as warm as down. And I was like, pump the brakes, hold on, like where's the context that is being missed here? And I think it was just like more aware in my mind because I've been preparing for speaking with you today, but it was but it was just like, wait a second, like what are some of the misconceptions of synthetic? Because if you look at it beyond just like the comparison of down, what are people not understanding about synthetic insulation that we should be knowing about it from a performance standpoint or a use case, or like that is it makes it so that people are like, no, this is a really good product, and why I should care about it.
You know, down is a fabulous insulator. There's no doubt about it. But I also think that it kind of has a very narrow band of where you can use it effectively. Whereas synthetic options, I think, tend to cover a wider range of outdoor activities. I think it's a more practical solution for the way most people live their lives these days. Um, it handles damp conditions very well. You can change the profile of it so that it's lofty or it's thin. So, from a design standpoint, you can really tailor the garment to a specific end use. Um, it's a lightweight warmth that gives you enough performance to handle the job that you're trying to do. And it's probably a more cost effective option in many, many cases as well. It's, non allergenic compared to down. So I think that down has its place. And we absolutely agree with what you said. Like, you don't want to make it a down versus synthetic conversation necessarily. I think that the two can peacefully coexist within someone's garment collection. And
Hmm.
just with the understanding that if I'm doing something that's a very cold weather, dry conditions, fairly sedentary activity, then down is a great option. If I'm doing something that requires changing environments or a damp environment, or maybe not super cold, but cold enough that I do want some insulating properties, then synthetic is really the better choice.
I think a lot of times the conversation when it comes to down versus synthetic really just only focus on warmth. And that's like one component of the totality of what a consumer should be thinking about. So you should be thinking not just is it going to keep me warm, but is it going to keep me warm in the environment that I'm going to use it for, aka is it cold and dry climates, or is it damp and changing conditions that I have to be mindful of? Is it easy to pack versus synthetic, which really packs down? And also synthetic can be quite quick drying too versus down. So, and also as Joe pointed out, the hypoallergenic, and some people are also incredibly mindful of wanting cruelty free clothing, and with no type of animal usage. So it's more than just warmth. You have to like think a little bit more intentionally about all of the use cases of what a consumer is going through when they're making that decision.
That leads me into the idea of going back. I mean, so Thermore started in 1972, right? Like that's a long time ago. That's before I was born, and
Me too.
the just even in, let's say, the 20 years that I've been working in the outdoor industry, the amount of like technical development that is happened, the evolution of fabrics, the evolution of textiles and fibers and such, even just in the last 10 years is pretty phenomenal, right? So like what is the development of the insulation been like from like day one 1972 to now? Because like there's a lot of different products. And if you want to bring down into the conversation, down is like one thing, right? It's an organic thing that comes from animals, from birds, right? And you can't just like take down and create it into 10 different products. It is what it is. But synthetic has the properties of a bunch of different applications, being able to like do thin sheets of insulation or like loose fill stuff. How much better is the product, or how has it changed over time, just to understand like that progression of performance, I guess.
I can talk about like kind of the inception, and then maybe Joe, you can talk about a bit of the evolution. So the inception is Lucio, the founder, noticed that the winter sports sector in the 70s was just booming, and it required advanced technologies, like layers that could get wet but also retain warmth. So he was Milanese, and there is obviously a deep passion for the textile industry in Milan, being the fashion capital of Europe. So he started to play around with developing like a thermal insulation that could withstand the elements of the mountains while also simultaneously adapting to the streets of Milan. So
Hmm.
in 1974 or 1972 is when he founded Thermore, which means more thermal. Um, and the other important aspect is he's kept it as a family business. So in 2008, his son Patrizio came in, is now served as the CEO. And Patrizio was born a year before Thermore started, so in 1971. So his first photo was even used on the first packaging for Thermore samples. So it really is
Cool.
like Italian company through and through, both in terms of quality engineering and also like a deep connection and sense of family, and is still family run. In the 80s is when they started to experiment more with using or recycling PET bottles and using that to like really play around and develop a more sustainable synthetic insulation. And they've really tried to have the sustainability portion of their business be the fulcrum of how they move forward in trying to make these developments. Joe, can you talk a little bit about how it's been expanding through the years, even since you started 20 years ago?
Yeah, for sure. In the 70s and early 80s, it was, a virgin polyester component that made up all Thermore products. And then as Lucio started to analyze the market and see that people were making many different types of items out of recycled plastic, he thought that there might be an avenue to actually turn that plastic into fibers for our end use. So that's kind of where the recycled part began. And as the years went on, the the processing of those recycled bottles got better and better, and
Hmm.
the denier became finer and finer. And initially, you may have been able to tell that, oh, this sample on the left is a recycled sample, and the one on the right is a virgin polyester sample. But now I could give you those two samples, and you would not be able to tell at all, um, based on the loft level, the warmth level, the softness level. So there's been a great evolution in the actual fiber itself over the years, and also in the way that we process it. We've just gotten better and better at getting the best qualities out of those fibers. And at the end of the day, you end up with something that is truly high performing, but still has that sustainability thread.
Currently, like Thermore's on track every year to release a new product, whether it be in their rolled goods or free fibers. So there's like a continuous need to like explore and innovate, because from our customers and clients, we are getting new requests every day, which means we need to get inventive too. So that's part of their goal moving forward, is every year to be releasing a new product.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Like I personally find the textile industry to be really fascinating. I worked in that for a period of time for a company that was making ultralight backpacks, and over the last like 5, 6, 7 years, a company came on scene called Challenge Sailcloth, making fabrics that are all recycled, post-consumer uh, types of products, but also creating fibers out of plastic, PET bottles and such. And I think it's a really fascinating discussion to have. But I think it's also important to ask the question of why do a recycled product um, if if there's just the contrast for the sake of conversation, saying create a high enough quality product from maybe the virgin polyester that lasts for a very long time, and then you're just creating a product that doesn't have that I guess just has a longer life cycle, like the benefit of that versus the benefit of the narrative around recycled. Like what is the overall mission of that from Thermore's perspective, uh, and educating the customer on why it's important.
There's a couple like major problems that plague humanity right now, and one of those is single-use plastic. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's a really, really huge problem, more so than any of us, I think, recognize. And that plastic pollution, um, it you can you can make your mark on it and collect it, recycle it, do something with it so that it doesn't end up um, going to some point in the environment where it could start to partially break down and then become a microplastic problem, which gets into our food chain and into our bodies again. So we're just trying to do our part because we can, where we're trying to just collect some of that plastic waste and turn it into something beneficial. And the great thing about it is that the performance and the longevity of those plastic recycled fibers is equal to the virgin polyester fibers. So we're not
Oh, cool.
sacrificing anything to go the recycled route, and at the same time we are saving many bottles from ending up in a landfill situation, or worse, even out in the ocean.
And where do primarily the bottles get collected from? Like, is it out from Garbage Island that's in the middle of the ocean, or is it more? I guess that is the term like ocean bound plastics that are like on their way out there, but like where does that collection come from?
Most of the post-consumer PET bottles that we're using come from Asia because our manufacturing plant is in Thailand. So we're just
Hmm.
mindful of our carbon footprint when it comes to transportation, because it's one thing to then collect a ton of bottles and then spend a ton of emissions trying to get them to the plant. So most of them come from Asia, so that way we're just being mindful of the entirety of our supply chain. Um, Joe, do you want to talk about Eco Down Fibers Ocean, though?
Within the family of Thermore products, one of our free fiber or blown fiber products is called EcoDown Fibers Ocean, where the collection point for those items is within 50 miles of a coastline area. So those
Hmm.
bottles, we're trying to stop them from going into the ocean or waterways before they could really start to do damage, because especially in salt water, um, the environment always wants to break down everything that gets exposed to it. And plastic is one of those things as well. So, organically, it can do a really good job at breaking down the plastic, but only to a certain point, and then it just can't do it anymore. And what's left over is a partially degraded plastic bottle with large, fragments of microplastic that start to float around, and that is the dangerous thing for us. So, if we can collect those plastic bottles near the proximity of a coastline area before it actually goes to the water, because once it's in the water and it's been chemically changed, it actually isn't a good candidate for recycling anymore. So
Interesting.
our EcoDown Fibers Ocean tries to give you an item that will, is basically focused on that geography to try to stop bottles from ending up in the ocean itself, or waterways that lead to the ocean.
I see. I see. I mean, it's fascinating. Just the amount of work to have all that collection, to source it, to figure out, then also the processing to then make it into a fiber that becomes like something that you wear inside of a jacket. That's really really fascinating. I guess the follow up question that I have is, once the insulation has been created, can it be recycled again? Is there like an additional lifespan, or is once it's spun into the insulation that Thermore creates, is that the end of its life cycle at that point?
Y- Technically, yes, it can be reused, but it has to go through a sorting facility, and there just like frankly isn't a lot of those available yet. And that is the sake of every single consumer good that is out there.
Hmm.
But that being said, we really focus on trying to educate consumers on how to take care of their apparel so that the outerwear has a longer use case. So our mission is to kind of advocate that durability is also an environmentally friendly practice. So being mindful of how you take care of your stuff, just like what mom and dad told you growing up. For example, there are like original rolled goods from Thermore products that are from like the late 70s that are still being out there used today. Joe, didn't you just buy something off eBay that you found that was like a
I,
retro Thermore?
yeah, I did. Yeah, I bought a Fila ski jacket off of eBay. It's probably from 1980. Yeah, it was. I mean, it's totally retro cool, and this garment is absolutely full functioning all the way. So yeah,
Gotcha. And that jacket had like Thermore, like rolled uh, synthetic insulation
our
in it.
rolled goods. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, that leads into a big question that I I think is important to maybe break down, and I use the word breakdown because a play on words here, right? Maybe it's a misunderstanding, or it's just how do you take care of like what you were talking about, Laura, of taking care of your product. Like my experience of over time of like compression of synthetic insulation and the use of it, and like especially when I'm wearing a jacket every day, like for many years, a jacket that I wore was the Arc'teryx Atom LT, which is a synthetic filled jacket. But I found that sitting at my desk in the climbing gym that I was working at, it was cold, so I was wearing a jacket all the time. Or driving, like just over time, the loft of that just completely like went out the window. It wasn't lofting anymore. So like what are the properties of synthetic that make that happen, and is it preventable, and what does that like process kind of look like?
We're always trying to make a product that is durable and to general wear, as well as to washing resistance, which is another way that you could potentially lose the loft of an insulation. So we kind of pride ourselves that our product does not lose a lot of loft over time, and it doesn't lose loft after washing. It's not really a sexy thing, but you kind of hit on the main point: is if you start to lose that loft, you start to lose some of the warmth and insulating value of that product. So once again, going back to the durability component of everything that Thermore does, we want our product to wash well and wear well so that loft retention is maintained longer term. From a packaging standpoint, when the insulation comes out of one of our machines, it's a certain thickness, and then after it undergoes the vacuum compression for shipping, it kind of permanently changes the insulation, and
Hmm.
it ends up remaining in that state for pretty much the rest of its life. Just out of curiosity, our hangers are, cardboard hangers that just have staples that keep the insulation mounted. And I just undid
Hmm.
the staples of a hanger that's been here for about 6 months just to see what type of how it would recover. And I don't know if you can see that or not, but just that first inch at the top here, there really isn't any difference between what's been compressed with the staple gun and cardboard compared to the rest of the hanger, which has just been free hanging. So the
Interesting.
you
Huh.
really can't do anything to our product that hasn't already been done way back in the process when it was manufactured and shipped.
Now, is that something that's unique to Thermore's product specifically, or is that the case for any synthetic insulation, Primaloft or generic stuff that is used as batting from Joanne's fabric store, you know?
Yeah, I mean, based on what we've done in our lab, our product does perform very, very well with the loft retention compared to competing brands and compared to generic insulation. It's one of the hallmarks of what we do, um, and it's Thermore's been very, very effective at that over the years.
I want to understand more just the various products that Thermore provides. I know there's like rolled goods. We've talked about like the eco down ocean. Maybe if we can get into a little bit more of like the technical aspects of the construction or how it's manufactured, so that if I'm a consumer that's looking at, okay, I want to buy a synthetic jacket, like what are the pros and cons of a loose fill synthetic insulation versus a rolled, how the like grams per square meter plays into like choosing that, because that kind of goes back to like that comment I made about the post I saw on social media today that was like synthetic is not as warm as down. It's like that's relative to what, right? So let's
Okay.
break down like the individual products, but also like how I might shop for the use cases of being a backpacker and a hiker.
I think maybe we start with breaking down the two parent, like the mommy and the daddy
Cool.
product,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
we have the kids underneath.
I like
So
it.
there's rolled goods and there's free fibers. Rolled goods are non-woven fabrics that are packaged in big rolls, so they can be cut and used like any fabric that exists. While free fibers consist of millions of tiny fine fibers that are packaged in bags, similar to down feathers, and then they are blown into the garment. So underneath like the rolled category and the free fibers category, Thermore has 6 options under each. And brands come to us and they choose the type of synthetic insulation depending on the use case for their specific garment. And Joe can talk a little bit about like those conversations and what that looks like with walking clients through each of them.
I think if you're looking for something, Devin, where you want um, a lower bulk overall and probably a more technical style garment, then you're probably going to choose a rolled item. Um, you get complete thermal
Okay.
coverage throughout. It tends to be less bulky for people who are active and on the move. Um, it's excellent durability. It washes really, really well. And like Laura said, it's like a fabric. You can cut it to whatever shape you need. In many cases, our products are so stable they don't even really need to be quilted, which is kind of
Hmm.
a very important thing for the garment overall, because if you don't have to quilt the insulation itself to stabilize it, then the garment ends up being warmer. And from what we've seen, a non-quilted swatch versus a quilted swatch, the non-quilted swatch will be up to 30% warmer in the exact same scenario, simply by virtue that you didn't quilt it. So there's a sort of a built-in performance edge to using Thermore products, just by virtue of that stability and durability component that we offer, that you don't have to quilt our insulation, our rolled goods.
Hmm.
If you're looking for something that is maybe a little more fashion oriented, you might turn to like a traditional puffer that uses free fibers, where maybe the ultimate goal is more of a look that you're trying to achieve or a feel that you're trying to achieve, and not necessarily pure all out performance like you might get in a rolled good. So it's a
Okay.
different mentality. The performance is still very, very good with free fibers, but it's usually a bulkier garment, and it tends to fit a different bill for the consumer.
How does the feel come into play though if it's typically sandwiched between a nylon or a polyester face fabric, like an outer layer and an inner layer? Like, how does the feel play into the garment in that case?
When customers are sitting down with us and we're looking at the line and they're looking at what they want to develop, I'll usually ask them to choose the lighter weight the shell material is, the softer the product should be that they probably choose from our line, because that softness factor
Okay.
will come through based on the lightness of the shell material. So medium shell, use something that is a medium level softness in our line. Something that is maybe a little more firm, like a stretch insulation, maybe is going to be used with a little bit different type of shell material. Um, but it's not as obvious with rolled goods compared to free fibers. But if someone does want to use our rolled goods and they want to get the softest hand possible, that marriage usually works best with a lightweight type of shell fabric.
As far as like the individual products between those two silos, like what might be a bigger difference of how they're manufactured, or um, just from like a performance standpoint? Is there anything that would be of noteworthy to share from that point?
I mean, I think that the key thing with rolled goods is that it just tends to be a lower bulk item, and when you don't want a lot of excess on the garment, but you still need good performance, you're probably going to choose a rolled product. Um, Many times that's used together with some sort of a performance membrane on the shell as well, that's waterproof, breathable typically. So you end up with something that isn't doesn't have a lot of bulk to it, but has a good level of performance. And even if you do decide to quilt through for aesthetic purposes, everywhere in the garment where you're using a rolled insulation, you have thermal coverage. So that is kind of a key difference compared to a free fiber, which is going to go into a puffer style garment typically. And everywhere you see a
Hmm.
quilt line, there is no insulation usually underneath that quilt line. So you look at the traditional garments made in the 40s and 50s, 60s with down that utilized a baffled type of scenario, and you recognize that just by virtue of the design of those garments that they really weren't super efficient because you're leaving 1/4 of the garment uninsulated wherever there's a quilt line. And you don't get that with rolled goods. You get complete thermal coverage.
And what is I guess in that conversation of down versus synthetic, in the comparison there, I think there's a lot of talk around like the warmth to weight ratio of down versus synthetic is you need like less down to achieve the same amount of like thermal efficiency. Is that still a conversation that is relevant, or are we so advanced in the development and technology of how synthetic insulations are created that a 200 GSM like rolled sheet of insulation is more thermally efficient than, say, like I don't know what the equivalent would be of the amount of ounces or grams of down in that space, but like are we at a point where synthetic is as thermally efficient or even more for the weight of it?
I think that the gap is closing. Every season, we see synthetic making, you know, more headway in terms of closing the gap between what I would really classify as a very high quality down. There's a lot of different downs out there. Every down is not created equal. So if you're talking about like a really good quality goose down that's 800 or 900 fill power, um, that is, very, very high end type of product that really doesn't get used that often for most brands that consumers are using. You're more typically going to see probably a 700 fill power type of down or
Mhm.
600 fill power or even less in some cases if you get into like the fashion market and step outside of the outdoor market. And the synthetic options have absolutely no problem keeping up with those mid-level fill power downs that are in the market right now. But we might falter a little bit in getting a even performance level with a really high quality goose down from northern climates that are sourced in premium areas where the geese are really offering a superior insulator. So
That leads me into, I just kind of want to touch on the idea of like the the idea of still down versus synthetic, from it getting wet, and downs that are treated with a uh, like a hyper dry down, or the allied products that have like the Expedry that's using a gold particle, like what performance do you still see from synthetic over a down product that's being treated to basically prevent that organic thing from getting wet and clumping? Like, is there still just the idea of this synthetic is better in this use case in a wet environment than even trying to use a treated down, whatever that use case might be? And maybe it's like two separate conversations. It's that in a static piece versus an active piece, right? Because I'm not necessarily going to use a lightweight down jacket to hike in because I know I'm going to overheat, but I could use something synthetic that I know is like going to dry and have the ability to keep me keep me warm and in a situation, but like I can sweat in it and stuff. But I'm kind of like digressing into two different two different topics, but that just that comparison of treated down versus synthetic, and maybe the pros and cons of still using a synthetic over a treated down.
You know, it is. I think it's a tough one to answer, Devin. You know, I don't know at what level the specially treated down products have gotten now, but my inclination is probably to feel that it's still not going to be at the level of a 100% polyester type of rolled insulation, for example, that is does a good job of still retaining some warmth when damp. If it does wet out, it does dry very, very quickly. It's hydrophobic, it's water hating. So, I mean, those are just things that are built into the DNA of a polyester fiber that I think maybe they're trying to replicate it within the down industry. But I'm not sure if you can ever, I think it's a good band aid, but I'm not sure if it can really get to uh, the performance of a polyester insulation because it's just from the ground up, it's just how it's built and it wants to react that way. It's got good breathability, it's got hydrophobic properties. It doesn't like water. If it does eventually get wet under serious conditions, then it dries very, very quickly. So I think there's just a lot of cards that a polyester product is holding that a down equivalent can't really compete with. So
Even from from a washing standpoint, where like what is the best way to handle the washing of synthetic? Because I see in videos from Thermore the like the clumping doesn't happen, but after a good amount of use, like I'm sweating in it, I'm taking advantage of those properties of being in a wet environment. Maybe I was around a campfire, all of these things that are now like introduced to that fiber. How does it like get effectively cleaned, and the best way to do that so that it continues to perform the way that it's supposed to? Because I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that like it bounces back really well, the durability is there, but like hikers and backpackers and like campers, we're hard on our gear, right? And things should get washed. But is there does it wash well? Does it come back to kind of that homeostasis point, you know?
So I think you also have to think about the garment as a whole. It's not like you're just taking the stuffing out and like throwing it in the wash. You have to know like what other components is that garment made up on. So hence like read your labels, make sure you're really mindful of when you're washing something, you are following the instructions because it's taking on the totality of the product. So not just our insulation, but also every component that has gone into making that jacket or that piece of outerwear. So read your labels, read your labels, read your labels, read your labels. Like durability is only as good as the instructions you are following. But Joe, do you want to speak to this specifically with the insulation?
No, I think Laura that you hit the key point is follow those labels closely. They're put there for a reason. They've been written a certain way for a reason, and you know our our product is just machine wash, cool, tumble dry, low, and if you just follow those basic parameters, you're going to end up with a good result. It's very easy to restore loft once a polyester product is put in the dryer, and just a low to medium heat typically will revive the fibers very, very well and get them back to that homeostasis state that you're referring to, and you're ready to start all over again.
And I assume that's the case for any of the products, whether it's roll good or the loose fill. Cool,
Correct. Yeah.
cool. What are the primary products that Thermore is being used in? At least from my understanding, like majority of it is garments, like right, like outerwear. But are you being used in sleeping bags or quilts, or what other applications might, as a consumer, I can look for various products? What other areas besides just outerwear might we be able to find Thermore's products?
The insulation that we design is specifically designed for apparel, given the
Okay.
company's roots in Milan, but we're always evolving and innovating. That doesn't mean that there isn't room in the future for us to expand and explore other use cases. But we're really focused on doing one thing really well. And a use case for a sleeping bag versus what you're going to be putting on as an outerwear are two totally different use cases. So we have been just doing what we do best, which is outerwear and apparel, but with the mindset of always being open to evolution if it makes sense.
We're a specialist. We are a very, very specialized supplier that is offering up a technical specific insulation product for outerwear, and that's what we excel at, and we feel like we do it better than everyone else, and that's we're happy having that space be associated with us, and we're fine with that.
Yeah, I like that, and I think I feel like it's important for a consumer to spend time trying to understand, not just like, oh, this jacket is made with this like waterproof fabric or it has these aspects, but like also trying to understand and educate on like what's inside, right? And I guess that's why I was like really excited to sit down and talk with you today, because for me it's interesting, but I also think it's just an important part of like choosing the right piece of gear, right? It's not just, oh, this jacket's insulated and it's going to keep me warm, and it's way more complicated, not in a bad way, but like there's a lot to understand and such from that perspective.
And that's why I think Thermore on my end is investing in marketing and communications and really educating consumers. Like one of our 2025 big marketing goals is to really help consumers think more critically, not just about the performance and aesthetic of their clothes, but also like their environmental and ethical impact and how much their purchasing power means in the marketplace and how that can make waves. So a lot of our consumer touch points are going to be hopefully focused on that education. So what's inside your jacket? What certification should you be looking for as a consumer when you're making a purchase? How should you care for your garment? So it's not just about like how should a customer should shop for specific installation or specific piece of clothing, but more shifting the mindset to be how can you be more conscientious in general when you're making a purchase.
And are there good resources for people being able to like expand that education and that learning? Like, does the Thermore website provide enough like information on like the environmental impact, like carbon footprint and such of like the manufacturing, but also just in general understanding that a bit more?
So yeah, our social channels and YouTube channels are going to be full throttle focused on education as our main goal. So we
Cool.
have a great video up now about microplastics. So it's not just about our insulation, but like kind of taking a bird's eye view of the problem in total. But one of the things that I want to work on is also just, it's one thing for us to say it and say we're great. And in marketing, as you know, there's a lot of greenwashing, and we certainly can spin a story. That is literally why we are hired. But I think when you're trying to assess the impact of a company, it's really imperative that consumers are looking for third party analysis. So, kind of like unbiased analysis of the entire process of what a company is doing. So, there's just a ton of different certifications that I would love to be more into the consumer mindset. So, some that we have obtained are like the GSE, the Global Recycle Standard, which sets criteria of recycled materials in the chain of custody.
Hmm.
Blue Sign certification, which signifies that a product has met like the strictest environmental and worker safety standards. And the Ocotex certification, which is a specific textile certification that ensures the products are free of harmful substances and are made in environmentally friendly facilities. All of these certifications are third party. And there are a ton of other ones out there within the fashion industry that you should be thinking about and looking for. And I, even as a consumer, am not necessarily always looking for that. So it's more of how are we making people more aware of how they should be thinking of this through the life cycle of their purchase. So if you tune to our social channels as well as our YouTube channel, that's something that over the next year we're really going to be investing in on.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's important to understand too that like there's a difference between, well, I guess if I back up a little bit, it in some ways it feels like there's the potential of I'm hearing a bunch of buzzwords and I'm hearing a bunch of like, oh, we're certified with this and there's this, recycled that, and sometimes it comes across as just like marketing jargon of like we're marketing to you how cool we are, but like where's the education that like stands behind that? And I think that's an important aspect to the whole narrative, because as a consumer, like if I'm on a website, for example, I know the conversation that's big right now is PFAS and PFAS, right? Like becoming free from that in the textiles and not using DWR treatments that use a PFAS product. But it's like if I don't understand that, I don't know what that means. It just says like, oh, we're PFAS free. Like, well, I don't know. Is PFAS a bad thing?
Is
Like,
that a
where's
food?
yeah, like is that just marketing or is it like education, right?
I think it's our responsibility to educate people. Like, I can easily throw up some greenwash jargon and then walk away. Like, that's what everyone's doing. And I think, like, especially for those of us that are in the outdoor industry where our environment is not, it is not just like the planet we're living on, but how we're participating. Like, we're out in the wild and wanting to experience nature, which means we need to be mindful to preserve it. So if you're working for within these companies, especially in the marketing department, you have a responsibility to educate that consumer. And that's where I've come down on it, at least, and doing our best to do that. And maybe you don't get it right every time, but the attempt needs to be there consistently.
Cool, cool. I guess from Thermore's standpoint, is there a newsletter that's available that people can be part of to like
Well, thank
get
you for
that?
asking.
that wasn't that wasn't. I'm not trying to like intentionally plant things, but I am interested from the education standpoint to like where can the resources be found and not just like let me plug the newsletter, you know?
Totally. Well, hold off on plugging it because launching in 2025, we want to be launching a newsletter that's not just like industry specific, but consumer specific, way where we are going to like feature people outside of Thermore and just what they are doing and how they are educating consumers on very specific parts of the supply chain within the fashion
Hmm.
industry. So stay tuned.
Cool, cool. Otherwise, for now, like the website has resources and such that
And
people can go
social
around.
media. For sure, our
Okay,
social media
awesome.
channels. Our website is very B2B focused, whereas our social channels are more consumer focused. And so we pare it back a little bit so that we are walking consumers through something that in the industry they might take for granted that they know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think it's great. I even though it is B2B, like still hitting that consumer side of things. Like I attended an outdoor retailer in Salt Lake for a good 17 years in a row, and I always saw like the Thermore booth, but I never went in there. And then because I didn't have a reason to
Killing us,
like.
Kevin.
But it's cool to see like there's you see logos, you see brands, you see these kinds of things. I'm just reiterating like how important I think it is as a consumer to like be able to consume those education points. So even though you're familiar with something or you've seen a logo, you've seen all that before, like maybe look into it a little bit more and try to find little nuggets of information. Joe, is there anything
For
that,
sure.
that you want to share uh, to follow up on that before we wrap up?
I think that kind of along the lines of what Laura said, that the consumer has a lot of power, and they also have freedom of choice. So they don't necessarily, whether this is a down versus synthetic argument or recycled versus non-recycled argument. The fact is, do a little bit of homework, find out about the company you want to purchase from, find out what kind of components they're using, because that all those little things add up to the total sum of what you're going to purchase in the end. And recognize that you have a different way of purchasing now if you want to. And the gap in performance between synthetic and down is very, very negligible. And you don't have to necessarily purchase a down garment to stay warm anymore. You don't. You have a synthetic option. And whether that's for performance reasons or versatility, or maybe something even deeper, related to ethical reasons and the harvesting of feathers, you have the choice. So take a look at it closely, and then do what you're going to do, but recognize that you have a lot of power in that purchasing decision.
And just hitting the final point home of like durability is sustainable. Like it is the key thing. We need to stop training consumers to treat their clothing, their high performance outerwear as a disposable good. Like the disposable mentality in general is just so out of control from the consumer standpoint. So we need to start thinking differently about things that we include as professionals and how we're educating folks about purchasing a product. And when you're going out and you're looking to purchase an outerwear, you want to find us, we will be on hang tags. So there's the orange Thermore logo, and it'll either be on a hang tag and or on a sew-in label. And one of the features that we implemented a few years ago was to individualize each hang tag so that folks can register the garment and receive a code of authenticity
Hmm.
from us. So just something to be mindful of, like even the labels that you have on these pieces of garments that you're buying that usually you rip off, throw away, and walk. It's done deal. Think about like mindful consumption, of being mindful with like looking through and understanding what the product is actually made of and what you have access to with the components of the product that it's made of.
That's very cool. Yeah, every aspect having an opportunity to gain information. I love it. That's great. Laura, where are the social channels? Like, where can people go to follow Thermore and get that education and such?
Oh my gosh, it's my big moment to plug. So we're at Thermore Official on Instagram and Facebook. And then we're also on LinkedIn for you B2B folks. So come on over and say hi.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I want to say thanks first off for taking the time. Like for me, this has been educational and really enjoyable. Maybe it was a little nerdy and technical, but I think that's a fun part of just like if I'm a hiker, I'm a backpacker, I should understand some of these aspects, and so it's
Honestly,
fun.
Devin, we've done like mutually little interviews here and there, and Joe's done a lot more than me, but you by far were the most in-depth and technical. So thank you for letting us like get a chance to nerd out a little bit. It's
Yeah.
really nice.
Devin, it's actually okay to be a total nerd when it comes to this stuff. So, it's having wanting to have that understanding, in my opinion, is not nerdy. It's being responsible. So,
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think it's the nerdy aspect comes in when I have found myself in various conversations over the past years where I'm like talking to somebody about the intricate details as a consumer of like a textile and like the performance of that textile, and like just stepping back and like, how did I get so invested into into something like this, you know?
What happened to my brain?
yeah,
Yeah.
it creeps
So
up on you,
it's
Devin.
fun. It's
So,
fun. But very good. Well, again, thank you for your time, and excited to share this with everybody. So thanks for
yeah, pleasure
thanks
meeting
again.
you. You've been a wonderful host. Thanks so much for your time, really.
Thanks.